All right. I would say this, anybody has any questions, please just write them down or make a note and we can talk after the slideshow, after the PowerPoint program, and we'll just take it from here. I'm just gonna see if we can move this along. Yes. As you can see from this picture, this is in the far back end of my property. Naturalistic landscapes like this, they don't need a whole lot of maintenance. As a matter of fact, even with the trees down I have in my backyard, I'm not doing anything. I'm just letting it go. Those are more native azaleas that came up in the backyard. So I don't have to do a whole lot. It's a beautiful, beautiful setting. However, when we want trees in the city or where we live, we have to put efforts into bringing those trees in, because something like this kind of setting, which is done for Christmas decoration, now all those Christmas trees are in pots. So they're used again once the Christmas season is over. And all that greenery at the very base of that, that's floating in a pond. So all that greenery just gets used up and over again as mulch. But the whole idea is that when we have cities and urban areas, we still work hard to bring trees in. To put that kind of a setting in the middle of New York City, which is where that is, costs thousands of dollars, thousands. But they're still worth it just because they want the trees there. We all want trees in our property. We like that connection of nature, even in the most harsh, most concrete setting, like this big, massive building, once again, downtown New York City. Well, look how the concrete pillars of that giant building are softened. The lines are softened, even in the middle of wintertime. There's no leaves, there's no flowers, just the twigs and those shrubs underneath. And yet these plants soften that harsh concrete building. That's what we bring plants inside for. That's what we bring them to our properties for. But first things first, this is what you need to know. In our area especially, this rooting diagram is really important because we have nothing but rock, chert, and clay for soil. So our roots do not penetrate very deeply into the soil, but they do spread out real wide, as you can see in this diagram. Well, what that means is that it's going to be stable as long as the roots and root structure near the base of the tree are stable. As long as everything's stable, the tree is going to hold up pretty well. When you have storms like we had just last Sunday, it doesn't matter how strong the tree is. You can see where the structural root zone is. That's where the root plate usually breaks when the tree gets pulled out of the ground, right at that structural root zone area. So once they do that, once that area gets pulled up, there's not much you can do about it. When the wind hits it, like I said, it doesn't matter how good a tree it is, how healthy it is, how strong the environment is. Wind anything above 60, 75 miles an hour is going to pull a tree over. But if you can give your tree good root zone for roots to grow out, that's going to be the best thing for your tree. But you have to understand that in your yards and your lawns and your areas where sidewalks and driveways grow, well, that's where roots are trying to grow. And when you buy plants in the nursery, this is a Japanese maple, a very expensive Japanese maple tree that was in the ground for about 10 years, and they thought it was perfectly happy and healthy. Well, after a while, it started to choke itself out. And the reason is because when it was pulled out of the pot in the nursery, nobody ever straightened the roots. So right around the very bottom of the tree, I don't know if you can see my cursor, right around here, that's where the roots wrapped around the tree, and then they all grew out hairy like that. And what does is all the roots gathering water nutrients out here are trying to move it up to here, and it's all getting choked off from a girdling root right there. When you have a massive root system like you see here after a purchased tree, there's not much you can do about that. It's unfortunate that it's 10 years, maybe 8 years down the road that the tree starts to decline, and then you discover this. So when you put trees in the ground, when you buy new trees and put them in the ground, the best thing you can do is straighten out the roots. If you can't straighten them, cut them. And you can cut quite a few off. But plant correctly. Plant correctly, plant slightly above ground, and make sure the roots are straightened out and not girdling. If you do that, you'll go a long way in doing the best for your tree. And look at right here, you can see that the photograph on the left, tree roots are going out, spreading out, reaching out, not gathering no water and nutrients. You look at the picture on the right, you can see the roots are wrapped around the trunk. Now, I know y'all will remember from high school biology that tree rings, and every year the tree adds layers. So you can imagine, as this tree right here tries to add layers of cells to move water nutrients up, well, these are acting like straps and girdles, hence the name girdling root. If you want to Google the term after this, just Google the term girdling roots on trees. It's a common issue, and this mostly goes back to container grown plants in the nursery. So that's the first thing you want to do, is make sure that your roots have room to grow. When you just place trees on top of the ground, this is our typical soil, isn't it? I mean, I don't know what this little dark spot is down here, but this gray cherty clay, no roots down there, no roots in this gray matter subsoil right here. The only roots that exist in these plants are up here in the upper layer. Well, that's not enough to keep it alive. So when roots dry out up here, you'll see the decline up here in the upper part of the plant. All right, that's for planting. Now pruning and trimming. Now we're going to talk about pruning and trimming as sort of maintenance. We want to keep things the way we want to keep them. When we want to do formal clipping like this hedgerow right here, that's a hedgerow, and it's actually called the keyhole garden because this little garden right here, this little entryway is cut out like a keyhole. That's the name of the garden. But you can see the formal form, the formal shape that is maintained on this hedgerow. Well, that requires trimming on a regular basis. When I mean regular, I mean at least twice a year. If it's done correctly, on evergreens, you'll be doing it twice a year, once in winter, once in the growing season. And if it's a flowering thing, maybe twice a year, once after flowering and once in growing season. But you shouldn't have to be trimming these 3, 4, 5, 6 times during the growing season unless you really want to maintain that super, very tight, formal shape. And you can do that. If that's what you want, you do. It does require more trimming. But this is fairly typical homeowner stuff. All right, there's no reason to actually trim these yew bushes. There's no reason to do this for this particular homeowner, especially for the appearance that you have here. This is a log cabin kind of look. These yew bushes can be left alone and be perfectly natural. But if you want them smaller, which is what this person wanted, they wanted the yew bushes smaller down to about the porch floor level, and they didn't want them growing up any taller than that. Well, this little piece right here and this little piece right here, well, they'll stay there unless you trim them. So to trim them off, do it in the wintertime. That's what it looks like now. That's more formal immediately after trimming, but it will grow right back. All this will grow right back to about the height of the handrail that very year. So you can do it once a year, let them go, have a little bit less formal appearance, and get away with once a year trimming just to keep them in size. If you really want that formal shape, you'll have to trim more than once during the year. Something like this is really typical. This is one of those thin-stemmed, really small-leaved Japanese hollies. And they're quite commonly used as a hedgerow for like boxwoods. Boxwoods would be the same thing. Well, to get those down in size, once again, you really want to do this in wintertime. Wintertime for us is Halloween till April Fools. That's our fairly dormant season. Yes, things start to grow in March, but you get away with trimming hollies as late as March and still do okay. So you can trim these using the hedge clipper. So you just shear it off. There it is. It's very nice and formal shape. And guess what? That very year it'll grow right out. Right down below that, right here are the azaleas. You don't touch those. Leave those alone until they bloom. When they bloom, you can trim those. So you can trim, you can hedge clip, you can shear. Here's your azaleas trimming. Once the azaleas turn their flowers from whatever color it is to this tannish color, you know the flowers are done, you can hedge clip and shear all you want. If you want formally shaped little round globes, if you want a hedgerow, you can absolutely shape your azaleas. Do it soon after they bloom. You can see the new growth has started on these, but that's okay because you're still within 4 to 6 weeks after the bloom. This is the setting. Here's your azaleas. Here's your azaleas here. And you can see there's still that brown tan cast of the spent flowers, but they have been formally shaped to maintain that size. Over here are the boxwoods. They were done in the wintertime. You can see all the new growth in the spring has come out and you just leave them alone. And if you notice in this picture, this back here, there's a little bell right here, but this back here is a massive, one of the largest weeping form cherry trees I've ever worked on. And it is massive. It has a huge 30-foot long arm going out this way. When it's in bloom, it is absolutely striking. It's absolutely striking. So trimming and pruning this tree here is important because this tree is invaluable to this client's property. But look at all the formally shaped shrubs underneath it. If that's what you want, it's perfectly okay for the plant. They'll tolerate it. It's just more work for you. The more formal a setting, the more work for you. You always want to keep that round shape, or at least wider at the bottom, when hedge clipping or shearing, so you keep the plant green top to bottom and don't get leggy. you want to, the sunlight to get to the bottom, so you keep them top to bottom. I'll show you a little bit more of that later on. Now, shearing is trimming. That's what I talk about trimming versus pruning. Pruning is a selective removal of certain plant parts. Trimming is non-selective. It's just shearing the whole thing right off. You can use manual if you want to get some muscle work going. You can use the electric hedge clippers, or you can power it with Genius if you really want to. There's, if you really want to hedge clip with a mower, knock yourself out. I think it's a bit silly, but this is not real smart. I mean, that's pretty dangerous, but I think it was actually set up for the photo, but I still like the picture anyway. Not a good way to trim, okay? But you can, if you want to. This is fairly typical. This is the Nessle R. Stevens holly on the corner of a house. This is really common. Well, if you want to make that formal topiary shape, knock yourself out. Get your trimming done before the new growth starts in late March, early April. So this is what your shape you're going to have when you finish trimming. That's what it's going to look like at the end of the growing season. So if you want to knock yourself out and trim that once a year to maintain that shape, all you got to do is once a year trim it, and it'll do just that. It'll hold its shape just like that. You can topiary shape just about anything, and you can make it just about any shape you want. This is technically topiary. So is that holly just in the previous picture. Technically, that's all topiary. Look at all the fancy shapes, but these are all hemlocks, and they're all wider at the bottom than they are at the top. Fancy shapes up top, but they're all wider at the bottom. Here's another angled view. Once again, these are all hemlocks, so it's a little bit tough, and you can see the variations in color of the foliage because doing topiaries like this really is tough on the plants. And to keep that shape, you misshaped some of the plants. But sometimes it can be really quite dramatic when you want a really dramatic shape. There's one of the swans. This garden is a formal garden up in Maryland, up near Baltimore, Maryland. It's called the Dew, and this is one of 6 swans they have. It's called Swans on a Lake. And this hedgerow surrounds a gigantic green space that they rent out for weddings and events and things like that. So you can imagine having a wedding in the middle of a bowl that's surrounded by these giant swans. It's striking. So you can do that, but you have to understand that doing topiary, and it's just like any other formal hedge clipping, takes time and patience. Look here how the dogs are made out of yew bushes, and this horse and rider is made out of a hemlock. But they're not expensive plants. The expense comes in the time it takes to maintain them. Here, these people here at this garden are so skilled and so practiced at this that you can see the base of the shrub is all leggy. These arms are all just lateral branches, and these are dogs, and they're made to look like dogs. And they're so skilled that the other shrub they did looks like a fox. And it actually looks like a fox because of the way they did it. So topiary trimming can be done in virtually anything. Look down here, you can see the little bit of growth at the base. That'll be trimmed out when they get to it. But look how they should use these side lateral arms to form the legs and the head and even the tail. So it takes some time and it takes some skill, but anybody can do this. This is not that difficult. It just takes a little bit of practice. Topiary is topiary, and that's all it is just trimming. You want the most simple topiary? These are all Chinese privet. Chinese privet. It's an invasive exotic plant. And look, this side over here just allowed to grow a little bit longer. This branch over here, a little bit longer. All these just cut low, put 3 posts in with sails on them. It's an ornamental feature in the middle of a backyard. So it's not difficult to put really interesting, fun features in your backyard. It just takes a little bit of imagination. But that's topiary. And that's the place, it's called Ledoux Topiary Gardens in Moncton. It's right outside of Baltimore, about 10 minutes outside of Baltimore. And if you can tell right here, what they do here, this is an upright yew bush. You can see at the base of it planted right here. And as they grow this, what they have done is they have built this pagoda frame out of just metal works, and they have a hinge on it. So as this plant fills in all these places, they will trim out the open spaces and leave it growing in the places they want. And they'll trim it out where it's growing in spaces they don't want. Once it fills this entire pagoda, they'll open it, take the pins out here and open this up as a hinge it open, and you'll be left with a freestanding shrub, and the framework can be used or sold. You can see the whole framework right there in that picture. But if you ever get up to Baltimore, Maryland, this garden here, Ledoux Topiary Gardens, well worth the visit. If you want to have some fun, it's one of the best topiary gardens in the East. So that's pruning and that's trimming part. Now we're going to talk about pruning. Now, pruning is much more for trees, although I have done converting large shrubs into small trees. If you have a laurel petalum on your property, the purple flowering or purple leafed pink flowering shrub that is flowering right now or should be about finished, some of those larger varieties of that shrub, I have converted into trees. So they can be moved, they can be pruned differently if you want. This happens to be a flowering cherry tree on, of all places, Cherry Street in downtown Chattanooga. Well, these cherry trees are a fine choice for these really very small postage stamp front yards because they will shade the entire front yard, they'll shade the entire front of the building, and they'll shade over the sidewalk in the neighborhood. But they have to be pruned to maintain that shape and form because we want to keep the branches off of the house. We want to keep it elevated so you can get sunlight in the windows and walk in the house. So pruning correctly in a tree like this is much more desirable as opposed to just topping. Topping is one of the worst things you can do for your trees, although I have done this for clients who request it. But we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But good management practices. Here on this, you can see right here's a pruning cut, there's some more pruning cuts, there's some more pruning cuts. Pruning for structural integrity is what you really want to look for. So pruning, how are we going to work on pruning? To prune, first things first, we've got to have the right tools. Those are the two most common tools I use. They must be sharp. I would normally do a pruning, demonstration on how to sharpen these tools, but it's really tough to do over video. It really has to be done in person. But what you want to do is sharpen these like scissors. They're called bypass pruners, but you sharpen them like scissors. Sharpen the outside portion of the blade here. This portion you would sharpen like a scissor, or this portion of the blade you sharpen like a scissor. And on this curved lower part, you would shave the curved part, not this flat part in between. When the blades go like this and bypass each other, never sharpen the surfaces that touch, that scrape against each other. That creates a gap in the blade and it will bend your shrub or tree, your limb, rather than cut. You always want the bypass blades to be very, very tight together. So when you sharpen, sharpen carefully. But sharp tools make it a whole lot easier. You can do a lot with just loppers and a hand pruner. This is obviously wintertime pruning. These branches I have the pointers on, obviously this branch right here, where you see the left-hand yellow pointer, that branch will never change. It'll stay right there. It'll just get thicker. Well, I'm a pretty short guy. If I can't get underneath that, then that branch is too low. So that branch came off. This one right here was too low. It came off right there. This branch right here was too low. That came off right there. So all those cuts right there I did with this lopper. So it's not that difficult. There is sap running out from those cuts because this, I think, was done in February, but that's okay. Don't worry about that. If you prune a maple tree in January, February, even March, you'll see sap pouring out. Many trees will do that. It does not hurt the tree. Don't worry about it. It's okay to prune in the winter. Timing on trees is not the critical factor. Timing when trimming flowering shrubs is important because you don't want to be trimming in September, October on azaleas. You'll be taking off next year's flowers. Same thing with forsythia. Anything that blooms in the springtime, before June. If it blooms before June, trim it right after the bloom. That's the palm. If it blooms before June, trim it right after the bloom. But on trees, it's not nearly as important. What is important is good pruning techniques. And we'll go over that a little bit more here. Correct pruning does not destroy the natural shape. These are those cherry trees I was showing you earlier, the first picture. This is what they look like on the left, what they looked like before. All thick and full. We could top those, and guess what? The very next year, they'd look just like this again. And they'd be in the way of the walkway going in and out of the house. They block the windows. They scrape on the house. They're in the way. Well, pruning correctly allows the form to grow, allows the tree to grow into its correct form, away from the house, up and over the walkway, up and over the roadway, and you still are loaded with flowers. So if you prune correctly, you sustain and maintain your flower show, just like these, right on Cherry Street in downtown Chattanooga, but they're still up and out of the way. Once again, these are not gigantic shade trees like this one here in the background. These are smaller trees so they can be maintained in these very, very small front yards and still do their job. Using a technique like this is not pruning or trimming. This is just hacking. This is just destroying or damaging an asset that this particular property owner owns. This happened to be at a bank. That bank is on Gun Barrel and Igu Gap Road. All of these trees grew right back. These were all Chinese elm. All these trees right here grew right back, and now they're back up the power lines, and they're more disheveled and more out of shape than they were before the pruning or trimming. So incorrect pruning causes you more work, and it's not healthy for the tree. So when you hire a tree service company, be careful what they do. What you ideally want for trees is you want to taper from a thick trunk to thinner branches to thin, skinny branches here. Now, if you can see this, right in this upper circle, you can see where these trees were topped last, but they were not topped by a human being, or even certainly not by me, but these were not even topped by a person. These were topped by the freeze at Easter time in 2007. All these trees came out. We got our freeze at Easter when all these stems came out, and all these stems died right back to this point. So we cut off all the dead ones, all the new ones grew back. But we kept the taper. When you see them topping crepe myrtles and doing what we call crepe murder, it's not good for the trees, and it causes you more work. Yes, the trees will grow back, but it takes what would normally be a tree form like this that you can pretty much ignore once it's up and out of your way, and it turns into a bush that you have to pay attention to every year. Why do the extra work and damage your tree? In large trees, this is vitally important because these are all silver maples right here. There's one back here, this one here, this one here, this one here. These are all silver maples. Well, the tree service company came through here and obviously topped them for somebody, and then this person that, and they bring that, and here they'll all grow back. Somehow, for some reason, they pruned this large oak correctly, a little bit better anyway. So they didn't do to the large oak what they did to the silver maples. Well, why did they do that? Well, because silver maples will grow back. They'll grow right back, just like this. You top a silver maple, now 2 to 3 years later, this is what it's going to look like. 6, 7, 8 to 10, 12 foot long stems like that. Well, they're not going anywhere. They're not going to stay there. They're just going to get longer, like this. Well, these are all really long and heavy now, but where are they connected? To cuts that were made years ago on large cuts that could not close. And if you want to see a closer view, take a look. There's your dead decay stump. There's your dead and decay stump. Look, it's virtually the entire branch. These suckers right here are very shallowly connected right along to the outer inch or two of a layer of live tissue right here. But the entire trunk down here is dead and decaying. So now as these pieces up here get longer and heavier and more weight, this down here is decaying and rotting. And this happens on every tree you top like this, whether it's a crepe myrtle or a silver maple, doesn't matter. The only problem with crepe myrtles is they'll close the wound, but they'll still decay on the inside. But then they'll start to fall apart, but it won't happen for 5, maybe 6, 7 years later. Now you have an issue years later when they're much bigger. But when you have a large tree, like a silver maple, well, now you got an issue because somebody can get hurt. Somebody can get injured. Somebody can get damage on their house because all these stems grew back. So don't top trees. And right now you're going to get a misconception because over in the Holly Hills section over in East Brainerd where I live, you can see some trees that were left standing. Some of the few trees left standing, well, they were topped years ago. Well, what they did is the homeowner did to those trees what the tornado did. So they just topped it a few years earlier. So West Georgia did not have the wind load on it, but they still have the same amount of decay going down the trunks. So the trees are worthless, and as they grow, they'll become more hazardous. So once again, even if it seems like, oh, this is the safe thing to do, it is not. Don't top trees, and you'll be much happier. It's much better to get a qualified professional to work on large trees. I would tell this to all my clients, and I still do. If you have a large tree on your property and you want to preserve that tree, and especially if it's near a target, a home, a garage, a car, a swing set, anything that's valuable, only get ISA certified arborists to work on those trees if you want to preserve them. Because you're guaranteed that they'll apply what they have learned to the tree. There's no reason they don't. That's why they earned their ISA certification. They had to take an exam. They have to keep up continuing education units. to remain certified. So to do that, they're learning the latest information. When you have tree work like this guy here, tree work cheap, well, that's what you get, is cheap tree work. Trees cut by Joe, when you have a thing that says arboristry at its best, well, there's no such word as arboristry, so that's a red flag right there that this person may not know what they're talking about. But what's even worse is that, here, this article, this goes from years back. Tree branch hits and kills worker. Well, that was a tree worker who had a lot of experience in trees. Well, obviously didn't pay attention somewhere. This happened right over in the street, right over near the mall. But it was years ago, years ago. Well, you know, when you hire somebody that's really not professional, you can tell right away. And when you can tell that, then it's time to get somebody else. When you do this to your property, that's just nothing but damaging trees. This was an oak. It's no longer there. This oak right here has sprouted back, but it's declining. These two, actually 1, 2, 3 calorie pears, I think Bradford's, all sprouted back out, thicker and fuller than ever before. Now they're going to pay somebody to cut them again. So every 2 to 3 years, they pay somebody to come in and hack their trees. So they're doing all this extra expense, when if they had done less expense initially by a true professional, they'd still have this tree would not be declining, and these trees would probably be gone. The damage is unsightly, but it is permanent. So save your money, get it done correctly. All right, let's do it ourselves. We're going to do it ourselves. Here's the best thing to remember. Most of the time we can do things ourselves because most of the branches we want to prune off of trees are to get them out of our way, off of sidewalks and walkways, like walking into this home, over the sidewalk here. Elevate, take the lower branches off. Excuse me. This is what trees naturally do in the forest anyway. In a forest situation, self-shading will provide so much shade that the lower branches don't get enough sunlight. They don't produce the carbohydrates. The tree doesn't send any nutrients or elements to them. The branches get shed. That's nature. That's the natural way in the forest. Well, out here, these trees are not in the forest. So they're going to grow with low branches. So they're going to grow in our way. Well, it doesn't hurt them to take the low branches off because there's enough carbohydrate producers up in the upper crown. So first things first, know the plant you got. I mean, you know that this is a crepe myrtle and that's a magnolia. You don't have to know a whole lot else. Know the basic tree you got, and that's going to help you. Use good pruning practices. What that means is, and I'll show you later on, always the last cut always at the branch collar. Don't leave stubs, and don't make giant flush wounds. So you do that, and you're going to be very happy, and your trees are going to respond really well. And when your trees respond well, what it really means mostly is less work for you. Now, if you want to work a lot, there are things like I showed you. I showed you my heart-shaped espalier out front. This one you can see is the diamond-shaped. This is 4 apple trees. You can see here the challenge that they're having is they're not keeping up with it. This is in that Ledoux topiary gardens, and the staff doesn't have time to keep up with it. They do have some fruit on them, but you can see the gaps and the spaces between where they're trying to do the topiary. This tree on the left, you can see it goes up and splits, goes this way. That's all that one tree right there. This branch comes up, they bent it and tied it to this one, it goes that way. This tree, they split 2 ways, 1, 2. Same thing with this one, split this way and that way. The tree on the right, they split left, took this one up to the right, and then bent the stem, and it's going this way. And it will fill in. But as in all espaliers, you must trim regularly, constantly, keep these long, wacky, wild stems from getting up, and you won't have these gaps in between. And that's how you get that real tight, formal shape of the espalier. So if you want to do espalier, you can do it. It's not that tough. It just takes time. This is a certain pruning technique. It's called pleaching. Now, pleaching is not bending. You can see the limbs here. This is not bending this over. What it is the pruning cut was done here, pruning cut's done here, pruning cut's done here. So the side lateral left limb is left going this way. As you can see, all these little twigs off the top, that's needed there to actually hold the leaves so the branches can actually grow so the tree can stay alive. But as you can see, with time and pruning, with the archway that this creates. Look back here. This was a topiary of a Buddha. Now this Buddha, as you can see right here, if you follow my cursor, there's the arms. But guess what? This Buddha was made out of a hemlock, and the head got hit by hemlock woolly adelgid. So the head is no longer there. So now we have a headless Buddha inside here. I think they changed the topiary, so it's a little bit different. But you can see the risk you take when you have very formal shapes with things like topiaries and espalier and pleaching. When you do these formal kind of, fancy kind of pruning things, there's always the risk that if something gets damaged, it's not going to be what you had hoped or tried to get worked in the first place. So now we definitely know we're going to take a branch off. I got this big pin oak in my front yard. This branch is leaning down and smacks me in the head every time I mow. I got to take this branch off. Well, here's what you're going to do. Here's how you take the branch off. There's a good branch collar cut. Here's the branch we want to remove. There, right down here, that's what a wound looks like when it closes. That branch was obviously too low, but that was taken off 2-3 years ago. The wound is already closed. You can see here, it's the smallest wound possible, as close as you can get to the trunk. You do not want to make a gigantic wound, a flush wound like that whole area. You can see the difference. That would be a large wound, take a long time to close. That's a very small wound, and it will close quickly. If you can see, take a gander right in this picture, the dark part, the center of that branch, that dark part we call heartwood. Well, it's dark because those cells are filled with waste material. Those are dead cells filled with waste. Well, that area there cannot do anything to resist fungus attack. Fungus eats dead tissue. So that's what it'll start attacking. So that's why you want the wound to close quickly. This white tissue around the ring around the outer perimeter, that's where the cell division takes place to close the wound. That's where you get this happening. So to close the wound quickly, so the tree seals quickly and is the healthiest, make a branch collar cut, which would be right here on that branch. Everybody with me so far? Thumbs up? We're good? Good. All right, here we go. Once again, we're going to get, basically it's a repeat. This branch right here is too low. And with these two branches, imagine when this branch is that thick, right there, as thick as that one. Well, they're not going to have enough space. So we're taking this branch off. So here's how we do it. You make your first cut out a little bit further, take the pressure of the branch, the weight of the branch right off. Your second cut's a top cut. That drops it off. There's no giant wound ripped down to here. So now you're taking your branch off. You finish at the branch collar. There's your final wound. You don't need a wound paint. Look on this wound. There's no heartwood exposed. That means all this sapwood is going to have cell division, and this wound will close very, very quickly. That's a good thing. That's what we want to see. You want the wound to close quickly. So that's all you need to do to get out of your way. Undercut to prevent it ripping. Top cut to remove the branch. Last cut at the branch collar, and you are good to go. No wound paints are needed. You can apply that same technique to virtually any major branch on a tree that's in your way. Maples, fairly notorious. Pin oaks, fairly notorious that that's what you get. When it comes to, if you have to remove a branch and you got to get up on a ladder and the branch is bigger than you can handle with a handsaw and holding the branch, don't do it. It's very unsafe. The weight of the branch can knock you off your ladder. It's better to get a professional. So be very careful, especially if you're removing a branch on a ladder that's like leg thickness and you're handling a chainsaw. Well, that's a sure way to get hurt. So I recommend don't do that. Okay, when we prune, this is a term you can Google at any time and look up the terminology. It's CODIT is the acronym. It's called coat it. And you just Google the term coat it in trees. What does it mean? I'm not sure if the official term has been changed to damage. It used to be compartmentalization of disease in trees. It's no longer that. It's compartmentalization of damage in trees is what it should stand for. Because it doesn't have to be disease to have damage to it. Trees do not heal like we do. They must seal off the exposed dead wood. If they are wounded year after year like you do when you top crepe myrtles, they are more prone to problems like fungal infections and insect infestations and things like that. You don't want to stress the tree by constantly pruning. The idea is that you prune the lowest limbs off as the tree grows and get it up and out of your way. We'll take a small break at the end of this PowerPoint program, and then there's other ones that we can go through. But right here, just to keep going, this is a small maple. You can see it's obviously on a slope. I had to use the crooked ladder here. But there's your double leader, 2 leaders. Well, in time, those two are going to compete for space and it's going to be structurally unsound. So I took 1 leader off. These side lateral limbs, this looks like it's curved, but it's not. It's actually coming out towards you. These side lateral limbs are left, but that's the cut we want to make sure that it turns into a single trunk, strong maple tree. Here's the same thing closer up. There's the 2 pieces. Each one's about arm size, arm thickness. Well, when they're both this thick, they're going to run out of space in between here. And then that's a structural problem. Here I took the lesser of 2 evils, the one that was more crooked, less straight, took that off. And once again, all sapwood, no hardwood in the middle there. So these cells are going to start cell division really quickly. They'll close that wound really, really quickly. And this will be a much stronger, much more stable tree in time. Here it's a crossing rubbing limb. Now, in this particular situation, it's just a little too late. There's a red bud here, and this is a red bud tree here. And you can see the damage that's been done. This stem here has been damaged by this one rubbing right up against it. Good news on this situation. It's only a red bud tree. It's not very big. If this stem right here gets a snow or ice load on it, it could break. And the point where it's going to break is going to be right there. That's the weak point. But what if it never gets a snow or ice load on it? It may stand up for quite a while. The point being is that even if this does get a wind load, a snow load, an ice load, whatever, and breaks right here, worst case scenario is you have to clean something up. Likely it's not going to hurt anybody because it's only a red bud tree. It's not very big, and that's not very tall. If this situation happens 60 or 70 feet in a tree above a patio or a sidewalk, now somebody can get hurt, or your patio could get damaged. So crossing rubbing limbs in tall trees can be a structural problem you want to have looked at by a professional. But in an ornamental tree like this, it's more a matter of, am I going to leave that and enjoy the weirdness of it, or am I going to take that out? Slightly different situation. Once again, this is more ornamental trees. This is the tree of the year for the Arbor Day Foundation a few years ago. It's called a Persian Perodia tree. Well, why prune this at all? You don't really have to. This is what it's designed to do. This tree is, it's a smaller tree, but it's known for its fall color. With good reason. Look at that. It's great. And that's just beginning with the yellows and oranges. But look at the structural integrity inside here. That branching structure is also a sculptural element in the garden. And that can be utilized to put lights on as a structure, as the sculpture itself. That structure of the branch, that's a sculpture. But you don't actually have to prune this tree. It'll be fine without it. But if you're going to, you prune out to thin this area here. You thin it out for structural integrity. You can see some pruning cuts right there is what I made. But I left low limbs right here, left a low limb right here. I just wanted to give these other limbs a little bit more room. Plus, I wanted to see that trunk. So this is the view from the patio now, and this tree is very close to the patio. This is the view from the patio, and like I said, with an ornamental landscape lighting right on this, upcast into this, it's a striking feature in the ornamental landscape on that particular property. And if you want to see the tree, there's the tree pruned. Now remember the first picture, a little bit of pruning to thin it out here. We pruned over here to elevate because people walk off the patio and through this area, so we wanted to walk through here. But you see the low limbs are on this side, no problem. And it still has all its fall color, still has all its form, and guess what? You don't have to touch it. It's been pruned, it's done, it's lit. I haven't touched this tree. This tree was pruned by me, I don't know, 8, 7, 10, I don't know, 9 years ago. I'm not even sure how many. Let me see, 2008. So that tells you 12 years ago. And I haven't touched it since. And this homeowner has never called me back for it, so they haven't had an issue. So when you prune for structural integrity. This is really typical. Somebody bought a crepe myrtle, did not pay attention to the description of what it was going to be, and put it right in front of their house. Well, if you had read the label that this was called, I think it's a coma crepe myrtle, it says it's a thick waterfall of white flowers. Well, it sure is. But right in front of that house is not exactly what they had expected and wanted to do. But it can be dealt with. It does not have to be removed, and it doesn't have to be topped. Look at these two little rabbit ears right up here and these little arching forms right there, those little arching stems. You watch, after this tree is pruned, those are all still there. So we're going to prune this tree. to accommodate the space in front of the house. Branching structure, highlighted. Shrubs underneath there, didn't even know they were there. You can see out the windows. Well, look, all these little arching forms are still there. The two little rabbit ears are still there. We want this tree to grow. This tree is still, it's over on the north side. This is still there, and it still looks about like this. It's grown quite a bit taller, but it's still up and over to the house. This homeowner has learned how to keep that pruned and kept in shape. But once again, don't top. Just prune it for structural integrity, and you'll be a lot happier. Same situation. Once again, crepe myrtle had been topped here before. Had been topped here before. But now this homeowner who called me and said, we cut this thing back every year, and every year it comes back and scrapes our RV. Every time we pull in here, we scrape the RV. I want to get rid of this tree. She doesn't. We'll prune it away from the RV. It's called directional pruning. And if you look right here on the right-hand side, left one lateral limb because that was up and over the house. But if they want to take that out for symmetrical visual balance, they could. But look, right here, this is done. It's called directional pruning, up and out of the way, no longer scraping on the RV, and not topped. And guess what? Don't have to prune it anymore. It's been done. It's up and out of the way. This kind of thing happens all the time. These crepe myrtles right here are right along East Brainerd Road. They let them grow for a couple years, and I thought, oh, okay, they're going to let them go. They're going to let them be trees. Nope, they topped them again this year. These on the left-hand side, they no longer exist. They finally took those trees out after being hacked and cut. I don't know how many times like that, including these oak trees, which should have never been planted there in the first place. This is in front of Famous Dave's on Gun Barrel Road. Well, none of this landscaping exists there anymore. So the point I try to make with this is that here, this property owner, this commercial property owner, paid someone year after year to come in and cut and hack these trees, and then they eventually look so ugly and were so useless, they paid somebody to actually take them out and replace them. If they had paid a professional who knew what they were doing, they could have kept all these things. They would have been up and out of the way. Their commercial sign would have been visible underneath the canopy of the tree, and the canopy of the tree would have framed the sign for them. So they did everything wrong for their asset and cost them a whole lot more. It's a shame, but it's still a matter of misinformation. It means be a smart shopper when you pay somebody to take care of the trees and plants on your property. Don't just hire hacks. They may cost you a little bit less off the front end, but in the long run, it almost always costs you more. So when you prune trees, prune correctly. And a little bit more advanced, this is one of the dwarf split-leaf Japanese maples. And if you let it go just like this, it's perfectly fine. That's okay, but it's a green bush. You pay $1,000 for a tree like this to look like any other green bush you pay $20 for. So if you want to prune it to look like something that is a sculpture, that's part of the sculptural element. Prune it to thin it out a little bit and get some of the branching structure to be visible. And you get that lacier foliage, that light what you pay extra for. And let's see if I can get this. And eventually, if it grows and it gets into shape, once again, you see that's me. I'm only 5.5 feet tall. So that plant, that shrub, or that tree right there, that dwarf, mind you, dwarf red leaf, split leaf Japanese maple is probably invaluable. If it were to be priced on the market, probably be worth somewhere around $15,000 to $20,000. It's invaluable on this property because it's a great location. It has to be, it's right in front of the house. We have to keep it trimmed so people can get in and out of the garage. But look at the sculpture of this tree. And once again, if you treat the tree like that correctly, it becomes the prominent feature in the front of your home. The good news about this particular house is it was a very Japanese style. So that tree fit in really, really well. So how do you do this? Well, when you prune a tree, this is the interior of that little green Japanese maple I showed you earlier. This is what it looked like when I pulled the leaves away and tried to look on the inside. Well, how do you prune that? We got to get rid of a lot of the crap first. But look, this main scaffold branch right here and these main scaffold branches right here will stay. So how do we prune it? We get things out of the way and we pick and choose which branches we're going to keep. I pruned a little one here and a little one here, but I kept this piece. Which one of these you keep isn't nearly as important as just doing good pruning cuts. Make sure you do all the way back to the branch collar so the good pruning cuts are left. So now this tree is back into shape, and now it can be allowed to grow. Same principles, slightly different tree. This is a weeping form of the blue Atlas cedar. It almost always needs a support system of some kind because it's designed to have a lateral branch that goes out and away. So this client put a support piece from here down to the ground right here. They found a, actually what they went, after I recommended get a support piece for this, they went to Southeastern Salvage and found an old wooden coat rack that stood up. Didn't last forever, mind you, it lasted a couple of years, but it helped brace this piece. Normally these are put along a wall or a fence or something like that. But the principle is the same. If you're going to highlight the ornamental features of an expensive, valuable plant like this, prune correctly. Don't just stub things off. Prune it at the branch collar and let the branches do what they are supposed to do. It'll define the character of the shrub or tree that you paid for. So moving on, once again, a little bit more advanced kind of thing. These are fruit trees. These are fruit trees that were cut incorrectly. Topping is not pruning fruit tree correctly. You do want to prune fruit trees to reduce their size so you can harvest the fruit. If you have fruit trees on your property and you can tolerate letting them be bigger, knowing that the top half of the tree will go to nature, birds, insects, whatever. The lower half you can harvest fruit off of. But if you really want to keep it lower, you have to prune correctly, and you're using a technique called drop crotch pruning and crown reduction. It's way too complicated to get into visually, but I'll show you on these pictures here why topping is just not a good idea. Once again, when you use a technique called heading back, you go from a thick branch or a thick trunk to a thinner branch, and that tapers to a thinner branch, and that tapers to a thinner branch. Same thing here. To a thinner branch, okay, it divides into several branches. I'm leaving them. Tapers to a thinner branch. Once again, tapers to a thinner branch. All these taper out to something, and all the cuts I made were at the branch collars. So we can keep the tree. So this is what it looks like the following spring. Once again, wherever I have flowers, is the potential for fruit. You just got to get the pollinators out there. But all these low limbs will potentially have fruit. Will they get heavy with fruit and could potentially break this? Absolutely yes. If you're leaving a long, low lateral branch, that's a lot of weight. You may have to put a prop, maybe temporary, maybe a permanent prop. But once you harvest the fruit, you can cut these back some. But once again, you still have flowers up in this area. So you're still getting fruit here. The idea is that instead of just topping and removing all the upper crown, you still have some branches of flowers and will fruit. So to do fruit trees, and you want to keep them lower, you absolutely positively can. With some trees, pruning makes no difference on their structural integrity. And if you want to know the example, if anybody has heard about Bradford pears break apart when you get to be 25, 30 years old. It's a common occurrence. Here's why. Bradford pears were hybridized where all the main stems originate and they bend over and they start to squeeze each other out right here, and eventually one just breaks off. Now, this particular client of mine had 18 of these, 9 on each side of their driveway. When the first one broke, they called me and said, what do I do? Should I top all these? Well, you can top them, you can, and go through all that expense, but it's not going to stop them from breaking apart because they're going to all get thicker down here and they're going to constantly break apart. Is it worth removing all 18? That's up to the client. I advise, look, just let them go and let them grow. When they break, clean it up, and that's how I would manage it. When they break apart, and eventually they'll all eventually probably break apart, or most of them will, clean it up. And then when it gets to the point where you can no longer stand the way it looks, well, that's the time to take them out. But that's the gallery. I mean, that's the row. Here, right back here is the tree that we were looking at. And you can see, all I recommended is to prune, elevate, to get these trees so you can get your vehicles in and out, and you can mow underneath them. Otherwise, leave them alone. They may break apart, they may last. I have since been back to this client, and 3 other trees, 2 on this side and 1 more on this side, have all broken apart. But they're still not taking them out. They only cleaned up the broken parts. And they had someone come in and propose, I'm going to top all these, make them more wind resistant or less wind resistant. They'll be able to take the wind better. Not really. What will happen is they'll grow right back. and in 2 or 3 years will be more susceptible to wind damage, and the squeezing down here is still going to take place, because if each one of these branches gets thicker, remember tree rings, each branch has to get thicker. Once they do that, they squeeze and they start pushing themselves apart. So if you want to waste your money paying somebody thousands of dollars to top all these and then have them break apart anyway and have to come back in and prune them again, knock yourself out. But if you pay attention to good pruning techniques and decide, well, you know what, maybe I don't want to take all 18 of these out. Maybe I'll just manage these differently. That's probably the smarter move economically. So, when trimming shrubs, like I said, when I talk about trimming, I'm thinking mostly with hedge clippers, but you can hand trim too if you want to. Timing is the important factor. For spring blooming plants, you don't have to know the plant. Just know if it blooms before June, if I want to trim it, trim after the blooms are done. Rhododendrons, I do by hands. Azaleas, they can easily be hedge clipped. So anything whose flowers are not important, hollies, boxwoods, yews, anything like that, where flowers are not real showy, trim those in the winter season. Nandinas, you can trim those in the winter season. Nandinas, you can cut right down to the ground. They'll come back gangbusters. Same thing with a holly. If you took a 20-foot tall Nellie R. Stevens holly and cut it flush to the ground and did not treat it, it'll be back. It'll come right back. So hollies you can cut, you can trim, things like that. Now, when you get into junipers, arborvitaes, cypress, spruces, firs, pines, they have what we call a dead zone. When they're big and thick and mature, you pull the leaves apart, pull the crown apart, and what's dead on the inside, that's called the dead zone. You cannot trim into that dead zone. Plant won't come back. Like I said, you can cut a holly to the ground, it'll come back. Junipers and needle-leaved evergreens, you have to be careful. So if it's between like a house and a sidewalk, and it's a juniper, you can only cut back so far. If it starts to outgrow it, you may have to consider taking that out. But hollies, you can cut back. When pruning trees, how you prune is far more important than when. Don't worry about timing nearly as much. There's a couple of caveats to that. Dogwoods and birch trees because of the insects that attack them. But for the trees themselves, no, it doesn't really matter. Don't top trees. Don't leave stubs. The good general rule is at one pruning event, you do not want to remove more than 1/4 or 25% of the live branches in any single pruning event. That rule was put in the ANSI standards because so many people were topping trees all the time. It's not healthy. It's not good for the trees. So that's why they recommend do not remove more than 1/4 of the live branches at once. What it means comes down to is don't top. Don't top your tree and you'll be good to go. Have I said enough about don't topping? Even the most formal gardens. Look at this. This is all hedge clipping, all hedge sharing. This is that Ledoux topiary gardens. This is that green space. Starting right over here on the left, you can see there's one of the swans, and that's the hedgerow of hemlocks that goes around this green space, and it's called Swans in the Lake. And you can see as you could set up a tent right here, a formal setting for a wedding, any event. This is a great formal setting. This requires trimming more than twice a year to keep that formal setting because that's what they want. Why? Because this formal setting makes them money. That's a garden they rent space for. So as you can see, it's really cool, but it is work. So if you want that, knock yourself out, but just know you've got to keep trimming. To all the other benefits the trees offer us. I don't know how many people have talked about this, especially with the coronavirus limitations that we have with social distancing and all that. But even medical professionals are recommending, if you can get outside for a lone walk in the woods and the forest, do it. Psychologically, it helps you. I've known this for years. Anybody that's in the Master Gardener program that has an interest in plants has already been educated on those benefits. They already know that. Anybody who goes into the Master Gardener program already knows, I like to be outside. I just want to know what to do. So if you like to be outside, you know you're going to be healthier, just playing in the yard a little bit. But I would say this, if you're not going to do a whole lot of the work and you want to hire somebody, be a good shopper, be a good consumer, educate yourself, and you can get people, even people who don't know anything about trimming, and they're on nothing but muscle work, as long as you're directing. For instance, as an example, I have a a hedgerow, a 30-foot long hedgerow of Japanese hollies, and I want to trim them every year to maintain the shape. Fine. Call your landscaper. He doesn't know anything about plants. Hello, Mr. Landscaper. I want to get this done in January. Book a date. I want 3 to 6 inches trimmed all the way around. You do it. Thank you very much. You have directed what gets done and when. They'll do the muscle work. So even if you're not going to do it, you can direct so it gets done correctly for you, so it saves you money and aggravation. So the last thing I'll say that before we take a break is, whatever you do, get outside and enjoy. If you don't think that this right here, this picture, can be your backyard garden, don't fool yourself. As a master gardener, you can easily do this. Now, this is a large backyard, and granted, you can see how easy is it to mow with all the easy corners. They don't make a whole lot of big, tight corners, and they're not trying to mow in between trees and shrubs. They're not trying to mow in the garden. The mowing space is your walking path. And you can see how easily that is done. That is a really fun design garden. All the perennials back here. Remember that that red sailed ship? That's right back here, that Chinese privet. That's right back there. You can see there's a massive old Japanese maple right there. But once again, everything is centralized. The border gardens are here, benches right there. You can enjoy benches right there on either side. Your walking spaces here. That's easy to mow, very quick time, and all your garden space is garden space. This, any master gardener could do this kind of a garden design in your backyard or something similar without much to do about it at all. So I would recommend get out in your yards, play around a little bit, and enjoy it. Enjoy it. Tom, I'm going to stop the share.
Yeah, let's see if we got any questions. Anybody have questions?
I'm going to stop the share, and I'm on video right here. I'm